Interesting coincidence. We just received a report of a stolen bike matching this description. Officer Emil Larkin didn't even bother looking at her, his boot circling the matte black Ducati like he'd already decided it wasn't hers. The accusation sounded rehearsed. He saw leather. He saw a black woman on a $28,000 machine. He saw something that didn't fit his narrative. Cora Beaumont stood still, helmet under her arm, hands open and visible. 20 years of federal training kept her face unreadable. She knew there was no report, only assumption hardening into action. She tried to identify herself, but he cut her off by gripping her arm and spinning her toward the bike. The cuffs snapped tight around her wrists. Whatever story you've got, save it for booking. What Officer Larkin didn't know was that the woman he'd just handcuffed on a public street held the federal authority to dismantle everything he'd spent 4 years carefully building. Before continuing, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you can't miss. The engine hummed beneath her like a living thing. Cora Beaumont leaned into the curve of Meridian Boulevard and felt the tension leave her shoulders for the first time in 6 weeks. The matte black Ducati moved exactly the way she needed it to. Smooth, responsive, completely under her control. Around her, Macon County rolled by in warm afternoon light. Shop windows, oak trees, families moving along the sidewalk without a care in the world. She understood that feeling today. She was borrowing it. 1 day off. That's all she had. 20 years working fugitive cases for the FBI, and the calendar had finally coughed up a single Saturday with nothing on it. No briefings, no files, no dead ends to chase down. Just the open road and the bike her late husband Wade had loved more than almost anything on earth. She had rebuilt it herself after he died. Every part, every bolt. It had taken her 8 months, and she had cried through most of it. But when she finally turned the engine over in her garage and heard that deep, throaty roar fill the air, something in her chest had loosened for the first time in a long time. Wade would have loved that sound. She was heading to her mother's house on the other side of the city. Pot roast, sweet tea. The particular smell of her mother's kitchen that meant she was safe, and the world was small and manageable. She was already thinking about which chair she'd sit in when the blue lights appeared in her mirror. Cora's eyes flicked up, then back to the road, then up again. A patrol cruiser, right behind her. She ran through the last mile in her mind automatically, the way she always did. Her speed, her lane position, every stop sign. She had done nothing wrong. She knew it the way she knew her own name. She pulled over anyway. The Ducati rolled to a smooth stop along the curb on Meridian Boulevard. Cora killed the engine and swung one leg over the seat, planting both boots flat on the pavement. She pulled off her helmet and set it on the tank. The afternoon air was warm and smelled like cut grass. 2 officers stepped out of the cruiser. The one in front moved like a man who had never once questioned himself. Medium height, broad through the chest. His name tag read Larkin. He walked toward her with his thumbs hooked near his belt, scanning the bike first, then her face, then the bike again. Something shifted in his expression when he put the two together. Something that wasn't quite a smile, but was close enough to make her stomach tighten. His partner, Garver, hung back near the front of the cruiser. He was younger, thinner. He crossed his arms, then uncrossed them, then looked down at the pavement. Larkin stopped 3 feet in front of her. His eyes moved over the Ducati slowly. All the way up, all the way back down. A $28,000 machine, matte black, Italian engineering, in mint condition. His gaze came back to her face. She watched him think. She had spent 20 years reading people, and she could read this one in about 4 seconds. She had seen that look before. Too many times. She knew exactly what it meant. She kept her voice level. "Good afternoon, officer." Can I ask why you pulled me over? Larkin tilted his head slightly, not answering, still looking at her the way a man looks at something that doesn't add up to him. License and registration, he said. I'm happy to provide that. She kept her hands visible and still. But I'd like to know the reason for the stop first. Larkin's jaw shifted. He didn't like the question. She could see that clearly. He took one slow step closer. We received a report, he said. His voice was flat and deliberate, like he was reading from something rehearsed. A bike matching this description was involved in a theft earlier today. The words landed in the air between them. Cora held his gaze and said nothing for a moment. Her mind was already moving, fast and quiet, the way it always moved when she was working a problem. A report. No report number offered. No description of the alleged theft. No indication of when or where. Just the accusation, dropped in front of her like a closed door, daring her to push against it. She had heard pretextual stops described in training courses her entire career. She had never expected to be standing inside one. What's the report number? Larkin blinked. Just once. Like the question had surprised him, even though it shouldn't have surprised anyone who had a real report to back up a real stop. Ma'am, I need you to step off the bike. I asked for the report number, Cora said. Her voice was still calm, still even. If a theft report was filed, it has a number. I'd like that number, please. Larkin's eyes went flat. The polite mask was already slipping, and they were barely 60 seconds into this. Badge number, then, she said. That one landed differently. She watched his chest expand slowly. His chin came up. Behind him, Garver shifted his weight from one foot to the other, staring at a spot somewhere near the ground. I'm going to need you to step off the bike, Larkin said again. Slower this time, like she was having trouble understanding him. Cora swung her leg over the seat and stepped off the Ducati. She didn't rush it. She moved the way she always moved, deliberately, without apology. Her boots met the pavement flat and solid. She shifted her weight, straightened her spine, and stood to her full height beside the bike. Shoulders back, chin level, arms loose at her sides. She wasn't performing confidence. She simply had it. The afternoon sun caught the chrome of the Ducati behind her, and she stood in front of it like she belonged exactly there, because she did. Larkin's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She noticed. She was supposed to look uncertain. She didn't. Officer, I am a law enforcement officer. She kept her hands exactly where he could see them, flat and open at her sides. My credentials are in the left storage compartment of this bike. I'm going to reach for them now so I can identify myself properly. I am moving slowly. She turned her body just slightly toward the compartment latch. The sound of Larkin's hand hitting the snap of his holster was loud in the warm afternoon air. Do not move. Everything stopped. Cora froze. Her heart was hammering, but her face showed nothing. 20 years of training held her perfectly still. She straightened up slowly, hands rising to chest height without being asked, palms open and facing out. I am not reaching for a weapon, she said. Clear, deliberate. Each word has its own sentence. I am a federal agent. My badge is in that compartment. I am not a threat. You keep saying that, Larkin said. He hadn't drawn, but his hand was still resting on the grip. His eyes were hard now, all the performance stripped away. Anybody can say that. Then call it in, she said. Run my name. Cora Beaumont, FBI Atlanta Field Office. It will take 30 seconds. Larkin looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at the bike. Then he made his decision. Turn around, he said. Hands behind your back. I have done nothing wrong. Turn. Around. Across the street, on the sidewalk in front of Dawson's Pharmacy, Councilwoman Lucy Brandt had stopped walking. She was a tall woman, 67 years old, with silver hair and a lifetime of knowing exactly what she was looking at. She had seen this before. Not this exact moment, but this exact thing. She reached into her purse without looking away and pulled out her phone. She pressed the record. Cora turned slowly. She kept her hands raised. She was complying, completely, visibly, making sure there was no room for interpretation, no gap in her compliance that could later be twisted into justification. It didn't matter. Larkin grabbed her left arm above the elbow. Hard. The grip was not the grip of a man making a careful arrest. It was the grip of a man making a point. He spun her toward the Ducati, and her hip caught the edge of the seat. She steadied herself against the tank. "Hands behind your back," he said, right next to her ear. She brought her hands back. He snapped the cuffs on. Too tight. She felt the metal edge bite into the bone of her left wrist. "Officer!" Her voice came out steady even now. "You are making a serious mistake." "Yeah," Larkin said. "You mentioned that." He walked her toward the cruiser with one hand wrapped around her arm, and she moved with him because she had no other choice right now. She kept her head up. She kept her face neutral. She refused to give him the image he might be hoping for. Behind them, the Ducati sat alone at the curb. The engine had already cooled. It looked abandoned. It looked like something that had been taken. The cruiser door opened. Larkin put his hand on top of her head, not gently, and she folded into the back seat. The door shut with a heavy, final sound. Through the window, she could see Lucy Brandt across the street. Still filming. Phone raised, eyes locked on the cruiser, and not looking away. Cora held that image as the car pulled out into traffic. Someone had seen it. Someone had all of it. That mattered. She didn't know yet how much, but it mattered. The processing desk smelled like old coffee and floor cleaner. Cora sat in the plastic chair they pointed her to and looked straight ahead, while the desk sergeant, a heavy man named Fuller, whose collar was too tight, typed her information into the system with 2 fingers. The cuffs were off now. She pressed her left thumb into her right palm and felt the soreness where the metal had bitten in during the ride over. She took one quiet breath and got to work. "I need to make a statement for the record," she said. Fuller glanced up without stopping his typing. "You'll get your chance?" "I'm making it now." Her voice was polite, but it didn't leave room for argument. "My name is Special Agent Cora Beaumont, FBI Atlanta Field Office, badge number 2247. My credentials are in the left storage compartment of my motorcycle. I am requesting that you contact my supervisor, Deputy Director Harlan Cole, immediately. That is not a suggestion." Fuller stopped typing. He looked at her the way people look at someone who has just said something they aren't sure they heard correctly. Then he typed her name in. The result came back in under 4 seconds. Fuller leaned toward the screen. His eyes moved across it once. Then he leaned closer, like the distance between his face and the monitor would change what it said. His right hand, still resting on the keyboard, went completely still. She watched the color leave his neck first, then his cheeks. His mouth opened slightly, closed, then opened again. He sat back in his chair slowly, the way a man sits back when his legs have stopped working properly. He didn't say anything. He just stared at the screen. The room was already quiet, but now it has become a different kind of quiet. The officer standing near the filing cabinet looked up from his paperwork. The young desk assistant by the copier stopped moving. One by one, without anyone saying a word, the room's attention gathered toward Fuller's desk like water finding a drain. Larkin was leaning against the far wall with his arms crossed, still carrying himself like a man who had handled a situation correctly. He saw Fuller's face and pushed off the wall. "What?" Larkin said. Not a question. Fuller turned the monitor slightly toward him without speaking. Larkin read it. His arms dropped to his sides. The room held its breath. Larkin's recovery was fast. She'd give him that. His chin came up. His shoulders reset. He pointed one finger at Fuller and said, "That doesn't change anything I did out there." Fuller looked at him like he'd lost his mind. "She refused a lawful order," Larkin said, louder now, like volume was the same as being right. "She reached toward a compartment when I had not cleared her to do that. I don't care who she works for. At that moment, on that street, she was unidentified and non-compliant." He turned slightly, speaking to the room now, not just Fuller. "I followed the procedure, every single step. I don't apologize for doing my job." Cora watched him from the chair. She didn't speak. She let him build it. She was on a bike worth $30,000 with no badge visible and no identification offered. He continued, "You tell me what that looks like on a routine traffic stop. You tell me any officer in this room wouldn't have done the same thing." He looked around, daring someone to disagree. Nobody did. Garver was standing near the entrance, staring at the floor. The room stayed silent. Then Fuller picked up the desk phone. He dialed an extension, waited 2 seconds, and said quietly, "I need Commander Sharma out here right now." He set the phone down and did not look at Larkin again. Nobody spoke for the next 4 minutes. It was the loudest 4 minutes Cora could remember. Commander Sharma came through the side door like a man who had already been awake for 12 hours and had just been handed a reason to stay awake for 12 more. He was broad through the chest and moved with the kind of deliberate slowness that wasn't laziness. It was control. Gray at the temples, deep lines around his mouth, a face that had seen enough to stop being surprised by most things, but hadn't quite stopped being tired by them. He paused just inside the doorway. He didn't speak. He didn't walk to anybody. He just stood there and read the room the way an experienced man reads a room, starting with the people who weren't making eye contact. Fuller, staring at his desk. The officer by the filing cabinet, suddenly very interested in his paperwork. Garver, practically folded into himself near the entrance. Then Larkin, standing with his arms crossed again, jaw set, rebuilt into his certainty, like a man who had decided the best defense was to look like he didn't need one. Sharma looked at Larkin for a long moment. Something moved across his face. Not anger, not surprise. Something more tired than either of those things. Like a man who had seen this shape of problem before and had spent years hoping it wouldn't show up on his watch. Then he turned to Cora. He crossed the room with measured steps and stopped in front of her. Up close, his eyes were sharp and dark and completely focused. He looked at her the way she imagined he wished his officers had looked at her. As a person first. As a specific person. As someone whose presence in this chair had weight and history and consequences attached to it that were still unfolding. He said, "Agent Beaumont." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a greeting either. It was an acknowledgement of who she was, of what had happened, of the full size of the situation that was now sitting in the middle of his precinct, like something that couldn't be moved without everyone seeing it. "Commander," she said. He glanced at her left wrist, at the faint red line along the bone. His expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes did. "I've spoken with your office," he said quietly. "Deputy Director Cole is on the line. I'd like to step into my office with you, if that's agreeable, and let you speak with him directly." "It is," she said. She stood. And then, because she wanted it on record, and she wanted him to hear it clearly, and she wanted him to carry it with him into whatever conversation he was about to have with Larkin, she said, "Commander, I identified myself 4 times. I stated that my credentials were in the storage compartment. I asked for a badge number and a report number. I complied with every instruction I was given." She let that sit for exactly 2 seconds. "I want that documented." Sharma held her gaze without flinching. "It will be," he said. He said it, like he meant it. She wasn't sure yet whether that was worth anything, but she filed it away and followed him toward the office, past the silent room, past Fuller at his desk, past Garver, who still couldn't look up, past Larkin, who watched her walk by with his arms crossed and his jaw tight and his certainty starting to show its cracks, even if he wasn't ready to admit it yet. Outside, 10 minutes later, the afternoon sun was still warm. She walked to the Ducati and pressed her hand against the fuel tank. Then she looked down at her left wrist. The red line across the bone had already begun to deepen into something that would bruise by morning. She pressed her thumb against it. It would fade. She knew that. But some things don't fade. And she was already deciding which category this fell into. She didn't make it to her mother's house. She called from the garage, still in her riding leathers, the Ducati cooling behind her. The phone rang twice before her mother picked up with the warm, expectant energy of someone who had been watching the clock. "Baby, where are you? The roast has been resting for 20 minutes. Mama." Cora closed her eyes. "I'm not going to make it tonight. Something came up." A pause. Her mother had been the wife of a civil rights attorney for 40 years. She knew what something came up meant when her daughter said it in that particular voice. "Are you safe?" "I'm safe." "Are you sure?" "Yes, ma'am." Another pause, longer this time. "I'll put a plate in the refrigerator." "Thank you, Mama." She hung up and stood in the garage for a while without moving. The smell of motor oil and concrete surrounded her. Wade had loved this garage. He had spent entire Saturdays in here, music playing, grease on his hands, completely at peace. She used to bring him sweet tea and sit on the workbench and watch him work and think she understood what contentment looked like. She went inside, sat down at the kitchen table, and stared at the wall. Her phone started vibrating at 9:14 p.m. She looked at the screen. A text from a number she didn't recognize, then another. Then 3 more in rapid succession. She opened the first one. It was a link to a social media post. The preview image stopped her cold. It was her, on Meridian Boulevard, Larkin's hand on her arm. She tapped the link. Councilwoman Lucy Brandt had posted the full video 40 minutes ago with a caption that was short and factual and devastating. "This woman is a 20-year FBI special agent. She was arrested today on Meridian Boulevard in Macon County. No crime was committed. Watch and decide for yourself." The video was 3 minutes and 40 seconds long. It was steady and clear and caught everything. Cora standing tall beside the Ducati, her hands open at her sides, Larkin moving in, the grab, the spin, the cuffs going on. The Ducati sitting alone at the curb as the cruiser pulled away. Cora watched it once. Then she set the phone face down on the table and sat very still. She was not the kind of person who fell apart. She had built herself, piece by piece, over 20 years into someone who did not fall apart. But there was something about watching it from the outside, about seeing herself as the camera saw her, small and controlled and cuffed on a public street on a Saturday afternoon. That moved through her in a way she hadn't expected. She picked the phone back up. The post had been live for 40 minutes. It already had 60,000 views. She put the phone down again. By midnight, she checked once more. The number at the bottom of Brandt's post had climbed past 400,000. It had been shared by 3 national news accounts and 2 prominent civil rights organizations. The comments were running in one direction. People were furious, not the distant, scrolling fury of people who would forget by morning. The sharp, focused fury of people who recognized what they were looking at. She turned the screen off and made herself a cup of tea she didn't drink. Her phone rang at 6:52 the next morning. She had barely slept. She answered on the first ring. "It's Julia." The voice was warm and precise and had no interest in small talk. Julia Marsh had been her father's closest colleague for 15 years. and had eulogized him at his funeral with a steadiness that had made the entire church straighten their backs. "I've already seen the video. I've been up since 4. I'm not calling to ask if you want representation." A brief pause. "I'm calling to tell you I'm already working." Cora pressed the phone against her ear and felt something loosen very slightly in her chest. Not relief. Something quieter than that. "Julia," she said, "don't thank me yet. This is going to get harder before it gets better." Papers shuffled on the other end of the line. "But I want you to understand something clearly. What happened to you on that street yesterday was not an accident, and it was not an isolated incident. I don't know the full shape of it yet, but I will." Another pause. "So will they." Cora stood up from the kitchen table and walked to the garage door. She opened it. The Ducati sat in the dim morning light, matte black, perfectly still. "Tell me what you need from me," Cora said. "Everything," Julia said. "Start from the beginning." Julia arrived at Cora's house at noon with a legal pad, a box of files, and a coffee she had already half finished on the drive over. They sat at the kitchen table, and Cora told her everything from the beginning. The blue lights, the pretextual stop claim, the 4 times she identified herself, the cuffs, all of it. Julia wrote without interrupting. Her pen moved fast, and her face stayed neutral, but her eyes got sharper with every detail. By the time Cora finished, Julia had filled 6 pages. "Did anyone at the precinct document your statement?" Julia asked. "Commander Sharma said it would be recorded. I'll be verifying that personally." Julia flipped back through her notes. "The report number Larkin cited for the alleged theft. Did he ever provide one?" "No." "Did he provide his badge number when you asked?" "No." Julia underlined something twice and said nothing. They ordered food and kept working through the afternoon, building a timeline, listing every name, every exchange, every detail Cora could recall. Outside, the day moved past the kitchen window in ordinary Sunday rhythms. Neighbors walking dogs, a kid on a bicycle, the distant sound of a lawnmower 2 streets over. The world running normally, while theirs did not. At 3 o'clock, Julia's phone buzzed. She glanced at it and said, "Dobbs is speaking." Cora reached over and opened her laptop. Sheriff Ray Dobbs filled the screen like a man who had been born specifically for this kind of moment. He was broad-shouldered and silver-haired, standing at a podium on the front steps of the Macon County Sheriff's Department in a freshly pressed uniform with 3 rows of commendation pins on his chest. Behind him, a small arrangement of department officials stood in careful formation. Local and national news cameras were assembled on the lawn below him. He looked directly into the cameras and smiled the smile of a man with nothing to hide, which told Cora immediately that he had a great deal to hide. "Yesterday afternoon," Dobbs began, his voice deep and unhurried, "2 of my officers responded to a call involving a vehicle matching the description of one reported stolen earlier in the day. They conducted a traffic stop on Meridian Boulevard, in accordance with standard departmental procedure." He paused, letting that land. "The individual stopped was uncooperative with officers' instructions and failed to comply with lawful commands, necessitating a brief detainment." Uncooperative. Cora said the word quietly to herself. Julia wrote it down without looking up. "The individual in question," Dobbs continued, "is a federal employee, and we take any interaction involving law enforcement personnel seriously." He said federal employee the way someone might say parking attendant. No title, no rank, no 20 years of service, just 2 flat words designed to make her as small and generic as possible. "I have directed Deputy Chief Warren Sells to conduct a full internal review of the incident. That review will be thorough, and it will be fair." He said thorough and fair like they were the same word. Then the questions started. A reporter near the front asked whether the officers knew they were detaining an FBI agent. Dobbs gave a careful non-answer about information available at the time of the stop. Another reporter asked about the video. Dobbs said he had seen it, and that a 30-second clip rarely told a complete story. He said it smoothly. Practiced. Then, near the end, a reporter from a national outlet said, "Sheriff, are you aware that Agent Beaumont has a clean record of 20 years of federal service?" Dobbs nodded slowly, with the expression of a man being very patient. "I am also aware," he said, "that Agent Beaumont has a prior formal complaint in her personnel file related to a use-of-force incident from approximately 3 years ago." The room shifted. Cameras adjusted. "That complaint," the reporter pressed, "was investigated and cleared." "Yes," Dobbs said pleasantly. "And I'm sure that will be part of the full picture as all the facts come to light." Cora closed the laptop. The kitchen was very quiet. She looked at the closed screen for a moment, then looked at Julia. Julia had stopped writing. She was sitting with her pen resting against the legal pad and her eyes fixed on the table between them, thinking something through carefully. "He's not protecting Larkin," Cora said. Julia looked up. "Larkin is just the part he's willing to show us," Cora said. "There's something underneath this. Something he needs to keep buried." Julia held her gaze for a long moment. Then she opened to a fresh page on the legal pad and drew a single line down the center. Then, "Let's start digging," she said. The call from the FBI came Monday morning at 8 o'clock sharp. Cora was already up, already dressed, already on her second cup of coffee, when her supervisor's assistant patched through the official notification. "Administrative leave, effective immediately, pending a joint procedural review between the FBI Atlanta Field Office and Macon County. Standard language, careful language, the kind of language designed to sound neutral while communicating that the institution needed distance." She listened without interrupting, said she understood, hung up. She sat with the phone in her hand for a moment. Then she set it down on the table, opened her laptop, and got to work. The review board could have its process. She had her own. Julia arrived at 10 with Councilwoman Brandt, who came through the front door carrying a canvas tote bag full of folders, and the focused energy of a woman who had been fighting this particular fight for 40 years and had not yet decided to stop. Lucy Brandt was not soft. She had grown up in Macon County. She had watched the city change its face without changing its habits. She had filed complaints, attended meetings, written letters, organized community forums, and documented incidents that never led anywhere because the system documenting them was the same system being complained about. She sat down at Cora's kitchen table and pulled folders from her tote bag with the quiet efficiency of someone who had been preparing for exactly this conversation. "I've got 3 families," Brandt said, spreading documents across the table. 3 that I know of personally. There are more. The first was a retired schoolteacher named Bernie Merrick, 61, who had his 2021 Cadillac Escalade seized on Meridian Boulevard 7 months ago after a pretextual stop involving an alleged equipment violation, a broken taillight that he had documentation proving was repaired 2 weeks prior. The car was never returned. The charge was quietly dropped 3 months later, but by then the civil forfeiture had already been processed. The second was a woman named Sylvia Crane, 54, a small business owner who had been arrested on Meridian 6 months ago while driving a company van. Charge: failure to identify. She had identification on her. She had handed it over. The charge was dropped within a week, but she had spent a night in county lockup and lost a catering contract because she missed a Monday morning appointment. The third was a 28-year-old named Deshaun Mobley who had his Kawasaki ZX-6R seized on Meridian 4 months ago. He was 22 years old when he bought that bike with 3 years of savings from working double shifts. He was still fighting to get it back. All 3 stops had occurred on the same stretch of Meridian Boulevard. All three involved vehicles of significant value. None had resulted in sustained criminal charges. Cora read through every file. She made notes. She asked precise questions. Brandt answered all of them. Then Cora went to the county business registry database and typed in the one name that appeared in the paperwork of all three forfeiture cases, listed as the contracted towing and impoundment service of record, Meridian Towing and Recovery. She clicked through to the business registration. Owner of record, Craig Rivers. She cross-referenced the name against public records, property filings, and a county vendor contract database that was technically public, but buried deep enough that most people would never find it. It took her 11 minutes. Craig Rivers was the sheriff's brother-in-law. He had held the county's exclusive towing and impoundment contract for Macon County law enforcement for 4 years. The contract had been renewed 18 months ago without competitive bidding, approved by a committee that included 2 department officials who reported directly to Sheriff Ray Dobbs. She leaned back in her chair and looked at the ceiling. Julia and Brandt were watching her. "The towing company gets the vehicles," Cora said slowly, working it through out loud. "The forfeiture proceeds flow through the county. But Craig Rivers profits from every seized vehicle that comes through his lot. Storage fees, processing fees, auction proceeds." She looked at Julia. "And the stops that generate those vehicles are being made on a very specific stretch of road." That evening, Cora pinned a map of Meridian Boulevard to the wall of her home office. She marked every documented stop Brandt had provided. Red marker. 1 dot per incident, with the date written small beside it. When she was done, she stepped back and counted. 23 markers, all on the same corridor, all within a 14-block stretch of Meridian Boulevard. She photographed the wall and sent the image to Julia with a single word: pattern. Julia's response came back in less than a minute. "That's not a pattern. That's a pipeline. Keep digging." Wednesday morning arrived gray and humid, the kind of southern morning that felt like the sky was pressing down on everything beneath it. Cora had been at her kitchen table since 6. Her map was still pinned to the office wall. Her notes had grown into a stack of organized folders, color-coded, cross-referenced, building toward something she could feel the shape of, even if she couldn't yet see all of it clearly. Julia had called twice already. Brandt had texted with 2 more names of residents who had experienced stops on Meridian and wanted to talk. The work was moving. Slowly, but moving. Then Julia called a 3rd time. "Larkin is doing a television interview," she said. "Local station. Airing at 2 o'clock. Cora looked at the clock on the microwave. 4 hours. "I'll be watching," she said. She turned the television on at 1:55 and sat on the edge of the couch with her arms resting on her knees. The segment opened with a sympathetic graphic, "Officer speaks out," and then cut to a studio where Emil Larkin sat across from a local anchor named Melissa Vance, who had the careful, pleasant expression of someone trying very hard to appear neutral. Larkin looked good. That was the first thing Cora registered, and she registered it the way she would register any tactical detail. Calmly, without letting it rattle her. He had worn his dress uniform, his hair was neat, he sat with his back straight and his hands folded in his lap and his face arranged into something that was almost humility, but not quite. Like a man who had practiced humility in a mirror and gotten most of it right. Vance opened with a straightforward question. She asked him to walk through what happened on Meridian Boulevard in his own words. Larkin nodded slowly, generously, like the question deserved his full and patient consideration. "Sure, Melissa. First name? Easy, comfortable. A man entirely at home. My partner and I received information about a vehicle matching the description of one reported stolen earlier that day. We observed it on Meridian and conducted a traffic stop." A small pause, the corner of his mouth lifting almost imperceptibly. "By the book." as we always do. The woman you stopped, Vance said carefully, turned out to be a 20-year FBI special agent. That's correct. He nodded again, with the patient expression of a man being asked to explain something very simple to someone who almost understood it. And I think that's where a lot of people are getting turned around. He tilted his head slightly. At the time of that stop, there was nothing to indicate she was law enforcement. Civilian clothing, no visible credentials, no badge. A brief pause. Just a very expensive motorcycle. And an individual who seemed to feel that the normal rules of a traffic stop didn't particularly apply to her. The word "her" landed with a lightness that wasn't light at all. Vance didn't react. Can you walk us through the moment she reached toward the storage compartment? Something moved across Larkin's face. It was quick, a flicker behind the eyes, gone before it fully arrived. When he spoke, his voice carried the measured tone of a man being very careful not to sound like he was enjoying himself. When someone reaches toward an unseen compartment during an active stop, he said, without being directed to do so, after being asked repeatedly to keep their hands visible, he stopped, exhaled through his nose. That's a safety situation. That's not a judgment call. That's training. His chin lifted just slightly. I'm sorry if that wasn't what she was expecting, but I don't run my stops based on what someone expects. Some viewers who watched the video, Vance said evenly, felt the level of force used was disproportionate. Larkin smiled. It arrived slowly, like he'd been saving it. Not a big smile, a small, private one. The smile of a man listening to an argument he had already won. I understand that, he said. I genuinely do. People watch a short video clip on their phone, from across the street, with no understanding of what an active stop feels like from where I'm standing. He unfolded his hands and set them flat on his knees. Calm. Instructive. When you're on that street, and someone is not following directions, and they're moving towards somewhere you can't see, you don't get to pause the moment and look it up. You act. He glanced at Vance with an expression that sat right on the edge of condescension without quite crossing it. The people criticizing this stop have never had to make that call. I make it every day. Vance held her neutral expression. There are those who feel that her repeated verbal identification as a federal agent should have changed the dynamic of the stop. Larkin's head tilted again. Barely. Anyone can say anything during a stop, Melissa. He said it gently, like he was being kind by explaining it. Anyone can claim to be anything. The job requires me to verify, not to take someone's word for something because they said it with confidence. The small smile returned for just a moment. Confidence isn't a badge. It was a practiced line. She could hear the practice in it. Vance looked down at her notes. Do you believe race played any role in the decision to make this stop? Larkin looked directly into the camera. He didn't blink. He didn't shift. He let a full second of silence pass. Not the silence of someone searching for an answer, but the silence of someone making sure the camera was ready to receive one. I treat everyone the same, he said. 5 words. Unhurried. Immovable. Delivered with the absolute certainty of a man who believed that saying something plainly enough made it permanently true. Cora turned the television off. She sat in the silence of her living room and felt the anger move through her chest in a long, slow wave. Not the hot, reactive kind. The cold, purposeful kind. The kind that didn't need to raise its voice. The kind that could sit across from a smiling man in a pressed uniform and wait him out. She thought about Bernie Merrick's Escalade, about Sylvia Crane's night in county lockup, about Deshaun Mobley's bike, bought with 3 years of double shifts, sitting in a tow lot right now collecting storage fees. Confidence isn't a badge. She stood up, walked to her office, and pulled out a fresh legal pad. At the top of the first page, She wrote one question in plain block letters and underlined it twice. How many times has he said that before? She picked up her pen and got back to work. Thursday morning came in quietly. Cora was at her desk by 7, working through a new stack of documents Brant had dropped off the evening before. More residents, more stops, more vehicles that had disappeared into Meridian Towing's lot and never come back. She had her coffee. She had her notes. She had the focused stillness of someone who had converted their anger into fuel and was running clean on it. Her personal cell phone rang at 8:22. Unknown number. She looked at it for 1 ring, 2. Then she picked up. Agent Beaumont. The voice was male, young, barely above a whisper, like the words were being tested for weight before they were fully released. It's Garver. She set her pen down very carefully. Officer Garver. She kept her voice completely neutral. No surprise, no urgency. The same tone she used when a witness called in on a case, steady enough that they didn't spook. I'm here. Take your time. A long pause. She could hear him breathing, could hear what sounded like a car interior, an engine idling low. He was calling from somewhere private, his personal cell, not his department phone. I need you to know something, he said. About Saturday. I'm listening. Another pause, longer this time. She waited without filling the silence. The theft report, Garver said finally. The stolen bike report Larkin cited as the reason for the stop. He stopped, swallowed. She could hear it. It doesn't exist. It was never filed. There was no report. The room felt very still. I was in the car with him, Garver continued, his voice dropping even lower. When we came around the turn onto Meridian and he saw your bike, saw you on it, he said. Another pause. She could hear him deciding whether to finish the sentence. He finished it. Look at that. Bet you that bike's not hers. Cora pressed her thumb into the edge of her notepad and said nothing. That was it, Garver said. That's what started all of it. Not a report. Not a call. Just him deciding, right there, in about 3 seconds. His voice cracked slightly at the edges. I should have said something. On the street. I know that. I've been telling myself I would have said something if it had gone further, but it kept going further, and I just... He stopped. You called me, Cora said quietly. You're saying it now. Silence. What do you need from me? He asked. Right now? I need you to stay on the line for another few minutes. She had already pulled a fresh page on her notepad and was writing in longhand, fast, and exact. Is there anything else? Anything beyond the stop itself? Garver hesitated, the kind of hesitation that meant yes. There's a log, he said. Her pen stopped. Larkin keeps a record, Garver said. An informal one, not official paperwork. It's on a shared digital drive. Him and 2 other officers and a sergeant. They call them productive stops. He said the phrase like it tasted bad. It tracks the stops, the vehicles, approximate values, which corridor they were made on. A pause. Meridian shows up a lot. How long has this log been running? At least 2 years, maybe longer. I only got access 8 months ago. Do you still have access? A long silence. She could hear him thinking through the consequences in real time. I can get it, he said finally. Garver. She chose the next words carefully, because they mattered, and she meant them. I know what it costs to make a call like this. I know what you're risking. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. She paused. If you come forward, I will do everything in my power to make sure you are protected. That is not a line I use lightly. He didn't respond immediately. She heard him exhale, long and slow, the way a person exhales when they have been holding something in their chest for days and have just set it down somewhere. My wife just went back to work, he said quietly. The baby's 3 months old. A pause. I need this job. I know, she said. Give me until tomorrow, he said. For the log. I'll be here. The line went dead. Cora sat motionless at her desk for a full minute. Then she transcribed every word Garver had said from her shorthand notes into a clean, complete written account. She dated it, time-stamped it, signed it. She locked it in the desk drawer, stood up, and walked to the kitchen to make fresh coffee. The shape of it was coming clear now. Not fully, not yet, but she could see the outline. And outlines were enough to start. Friday morning. 6 days since the stop on Meridian Boulevard. Garver had not yet delivered the logbook. Cora had checked her phone a dozen times before breakfast and told herself to stop checking. He would come through or he wouldn't. Pushing him would only make him pull back. She knew how witnesses worked. She had spent 20 years managing them. She got dressed, picked up her files, and drove to Julia's office. Julia Marsh worked out of a 3-room suite on the 4th floor of a building on Delaney Street that smelled like old carpet and legal history. The walls were lined with case files, framed rulings, photographs of courtrooms and clients, and moments that had mattered. There was a photo near the window of Julia standing beside Cora's father at what looked like a press conference, both of them young and sharp-eyed and leaning slightly forward, like they were always about to say something important. Cora sat across from Julia's desk and watched her finish the last read-through of the document she had been building for 6 days. 63 pages. Single-spaced. Meticulous. Julia set the last page down, aligned the stack against the desk with both hands, and looked up. This is the strongest Section 1983 filing I have put my name on in 30 years of practice, she said. Not as a boast. As a fact, stated plainly for the record. Walk me through it, Cora said. Julia walked her through it. The filing named Officer Emil Larkin, Officer Mitch Garver, Sheriff Ray Dobbs, and Macon County as defendants. It documented Cora's arrest in precise chronological detail. The fabricated pretext, the 4 verbal identifications, the unlawful use of force, the departmental response, the Dobbs press conference, the deliberate burial of her credentials and rank. It then laid out the pattern. Every documented pretextual stop on Meridian Boulevard that Brandt had provided, cross-referenced against Meridian Towing's contract records and the civil forfeiture filings. It argued a clear and sustained violation of constitutional rights under color of law, supported by documented evidence, witness accounts, and video footage that was currently sitting at 4 million views and climbing. Julia filed it electronically at 11:47 Friday morning. By early afternoon, it was public record. By 3 o'clock, a legal analyst on a national cable network held up a printed copy and told his audience that the filing was, and he was quoting directly from a law professor he had spoken with, one of the most comprehensively documented civil rights complaints to come through a federal district court in recent memory. Cora watched the coverage from Julia's office. She felt something she was careful not to call hope, because hope had a way of making the falls harder. She called it momentum instead. Momentum was sturdier. Momentum was built from work. Her phone buzzed at 4:15. Deputy Director Cole. She stepped into the hallway to take the call. I'm going to tell you something, Cole said without greeting in the direct way he had always spoken to her. And I need you to hear it clearly and keep it between us for now. A brief pause. The U.S. Attorney's Office in Atlanta has been watching this situation since the press conference. Julia's filing today accelerated their timeline. They are considering opening a parallel criminal civil rights investigation under federal jurisdiction. Cora leaned against the hallway wall. When? That depends on what else surfaces, but the conversation is happening. And federal jurisdiction means Dobbs has no seat at the table. Another pause. I want you to keep doing what you're doing. and I want you to be careful." "Understood," she said. "Cora." His voice shifted, not softer, but more direct, like he was setting the professional language down for a moment. "What they did to you on that street was an outrage. I want you to know that I said those exact words to the U.S. Attorney personally." She didn't respond immediately. She looked at the photograph of her father and Julia on the wall through the open office door. "Thank you, Harlan," she said. She went back inside. Julia was pouring 2 glasses of sweet tea from a pitcher she kept in the small refrigerator behind her desk. Brant arrived 20 minutes later, having driven straight from a city council session, still in her good blazer. They sat together as the late afternoon light came through the window. Julia raised her glass. Nobody made a formal toast. They didn't need to. The feeling in the room said everything that needed saying. Cora allowed herself one evening of it, the warmth of it, the feeling that the ground beneath them was finally solid. She didn't know it was about to give way. Saturday morning. 1 week exactly since the stop on Meridian Boulevard. Cora was making coffee when her personal cell rang at 7:43. She saw the number and picked up on the second ring. "Garver." A long silence. Then, "Yeah." His voice was different from Thursday's call. Thursday had carried fear in it, but also something live and moving. The sound of a man who had made a decision and was still feeling the energy of it. This was different. This was the sound of a man who had made a different decision. Flat. Compressed. Like something had been pressed down on top of him and was still pressing. "I need to tell you something," he said. She waited. "After consulting counsel." He stopped. Started again. "After consulting counsel, I've had to amend my statement about Saturday's stop." Cora set the coffee pot down without making a sound. She moved to the kitchen table and sat down, and she did not reach for a pen because she did not want the sound of writing to make him feel documented in this moment. She would document it after. "Okay," she said. "Just that. I want you to know that I—" His voice caught briefly. "This is bigger than I thought. When I called you Thursday, I thought it was just—" He exhaled. "I didn't understand the full scope of what I was stepping into. I understand it better now." "What changed?" she asked. Quiet. No edge in it. "I have to be careful now." The phrase arrived like something rehearsed, something told to him and repeated back. "I have a family. I have a 3-month-old son. I have a mortgage and a pension. And I—" He stopped. "I have to be careful now." "Did someone talk to you, Garver?" A long pause. "I consulted counsel," he said again. "And counsel advised me that my original account of events was incomplete and potentially misleading, and that a corrected statement was in my best interest." A pause. "And in my family's best interest." "In my family's best interest." She heard the shape of that sentence. She heard what it was built around. "I want you to hear me say something," he said. His voice shifted, lower, faster, like the words were getting out before something stopped them. "I'm not saying nothing happened. I'm saying I have to be careful now about how I characterize what happened. There's a difference." Another pause. "You understand what I'm saying to you?" "I understand exactly what you're saying," she said. "This is bigger than I thought." He said it again, the same phrase, and this time it sounded less like something rehearsed and more like something he genuinely believed and was terrified by. "When I made that call Thursday, I thought it was just Larkin being Larkin. I didn't see how far back it went. I see it now." His breath was unsteady. "I have to protect my family. You understand what it is to protect someone?" "I do," she said. "I'm sorry." The 2 words came out stripped of everything except what they actually were. No framing, no legal language, just 2 words from a frightened man who knew the difference between what he was doing and what was right and was doing it anyway. "I'm sorry." I have to be careful now. I just can't. The line went quiet. Not dead. She could still hear him breathing, could hear what sounded like a car window and wind outside it, and the muffled noise of a Saturday morning street somewhere. Garver, she said carefully. Yeah. Keep the phone. A silence. Then, what? Whatever phone you've been using to make these calls. Keep it. Don't delete anything. Don't let anyone else handle it. She paused. Can you do that? Another silence. Longer this time. She let it run. Yeah, he said finally. Barely audible. I can do that. That's enough for now. He hung up. Cora sat at the kitchen table with the phone in both hands and looked at the morning light coming through the window over the sink. She stayed very still for a long moment. Then she picked up her pen and wrote down everything he had said, word for word, in the precise longhand she used for witness accounts. Every phrase, every hesitation, every repetition of, I have to be careful now. Every repetition of this is bigger than I thought. She dated it, time-stamped it, noted the call duration. She sat back and read it through once. He hadn't lied to her. Not completely. He had told her something important, carefully enough that it couldn't be used against him. She understood. She didn't like it, but she understood. Her phone rang 4 minutes later. Julia's name on the screen. Garver recanted, Julia said. I know. He just called me. A pause. He showed up at the department this morning with a county-retained attorney and gave a revised written statement. Full reversal. He now says the stop was conducted properly, that Larkin followed procedure at every step, and that your behavior on the street created a reasonable safety concern. Julia's voice was controlled, but Cora could hear the effort it was taking. His new statement reads like Larkin wrote it. The recording from Thursday's call, Cora said. Informal, not made under oath. His attorney is already calling it coerced and out of context. A pause. Without a formal sworn statement, it's contested at best. What about the logbook? The silence that followed lasted just long enough to tell her everything before Julia spoke. The shared drive has been wiped. Not deleted. Professionally sanitized. Done within 24 hours of Garver's original call to you. Julia's voice was careful and precise. Someone in the department's IT infrastructure knew exactly what was on it, and moved fast enough to make sure it wouldn't be there when anyone came looking. Cora stood at her kitchen counter and looked out the window at the backyard. A bird was moving along the fence line, stopping, starting, stopping again. He called me from a personal cell, she said quietly. Both times. A phone record shows a call was made, not what was said on it, and he's already characterizing the conversation differently. Julia exhaled. I'm not telling you it's over. The civil filing stands. The forfeiture pattern evidence is still solid. But without Garver's testimony and without that logbook, the criminal case isn't there yet, Cora said. Isn't there yet. Dobbs held his second press conference at noon. Cora watched it standing up, arms crossed, from across the room. Dobbs was even smoother than the first time. He had clearly enjoyed the week. He stood at the same podium in the same uniform and announced that the internal review conducted by Deputy Chief Warren Sells had concluded. The findings were clear. Officer Larkin had conducted the stop on Meridian Boulevard in full accordance with departmental procedure. Every decision fell within the boundaries of his training and his authority. Effective immediately, Larkin was reinstated to full active duty with back pay. Then, Dobbs looked into the cameras and said, "This department stands behind its officers. That has always been true, and it will always be true." He didn't take questions. 4 minutes and 12 seconds. Then it was over. Cora turned the television off, walked through the house and into the garage. She stood beside the Ducati in the dim Saturday light and put her hand flat on the fuel tank. The metal was cool and solid, and exactly where she had left it. She ran through what she knew. Garver had been pressured. The speed of the drive wipe confirmed that someone had been monitoring the situation closely enough to act within hours. Dobbs had a compliant internal investigator, a reinstated officer, and a narrative he had now delivered twice on camera. On paper, he was winning. But paper wasn't everything. She thought about what she did for a living. She found things that people had tried to make unfindable. She built cases from fragments that looked like nothing until they were assembled correctly. Data didn't vanish. It migrated. A wipe order was only as complete as the person issuing it understood the system they were wiping. And most people, in Cora's experience, didn't fully understand the systems they were operating in. She thought about Garver's voice. This is bigger than I thought. The genuine terror underneath it. He hadn't given her the logbook, but he had kept his phone. And he had told her, in every careful word and every deliberate hesitation, that there was something real to find. She took her hand off the tank, stood straight, went back inside. She didn't sleep Saturday night. Not in the restless, frustrated way of someone waiting for something to happen. She lay in the dark with her eyes open and her mind running clean and organized, the way it ran on the long nights before a major operation, methodical, turning the problem over slowly, examining each surface for something she hadn't seen yet. By 2 a.m, she was sitting at her desk. She pulled out everything she had. The forfeiture files, Brant's resident accounts, the timeline she had built from the beginning, the notes from Garver's 2 calls. She laid it all out across the desk in chronological order, and sat back and looked at it the way she looked at evidence boards in the field, not searching for any one thing, but letting the whole picture settle until the shape of what was missing became visible. The logbook was gone. Garver had recanted. Dobbs was untouchable inside his own county. Those were the walls. She thought about walls. In her experience, walls were only solid until you found the part that nobody had bothered to reinforce because nobody thought anyone would look there. She picked up her personal cell and scrolled to a number she hadn't called in 14 months. Wade Arden had worked cyber forensics for the FBI's Atlanta division for 11 years. He was quiet, methodical, and extraordinary at his job in the way that people are extraordinary when they genuinely love what they do. 3 years ago, Cora had built a trafficking case alongside him that had put a man named Gerald Poole away for 31 years. Arden had worked 4 consecutive nights without sleep to recover encrypted communication files that Poole's attorneys had sworn were permanently deleted. They weren't. He picked up on the 3rd ring. Beaumont. His voice was warm and unhurried, the voice of a man who answered calls from former colleagues at 2 a.m. without making it strange. "I've been watching the news. I need a favor," she said. "Off the books initially. I need eyes on something." A brief pause. Not hesitation. Consideration. There was a difference, and she knew which one this was. "Tell me what you're looking at," he said. She told him about the shared drive, the professional wipe, the timeline, how quickly it had been sanitized after Garver's Thursday call, which told her the person who ordered it understood the urgency, but may not have understood the full architecture of the system they were scrubbing. Arden listened without interrupting. She could hear him typing lightly in the background. "Who managed the department's IT infrastructure?" he asked. "Third-party contractor. Company called Meridian Data Solutions. County contract, renewed annually." More typing. A pause. "You said the wipe was done within 24 hours? Best estimate from our tech contact." "Yes. Fast enough to be panicked," Arden said. "Not fast enough to be thorough." Another pause. Emergency wipes almost always miss redundancy architecture. People think about the primary system. They don't think about the backup conversation happening in the background. His typing stopped. "Give me until Sunday evening." "Arden." "I know," he said. "By the book, when it counts. I'm just looking right now." Sunday evening, she was at her kitchen table with a cup of tea that had gone cold when her phone buzzed. Wade Arden. One message. No preamble. "Call me." She called. The third-party contractor used off-site cloud redundancy for all county department data, Arden said, and she could hear something controlled and focused in his voice, the sound he made when he had found something real. Standard backup architecture, automated, running continuously in the background. The wipe order was issued to the primary shared drive and the local server backup. It was never transmitted to the cloud redundancy point. A pause. Because nobody in that department knew it existed. It wasn't documented in their internal IT records. It was a contractor default setting that was never disclosed to the client. Cora was very still. "The logbook," she said. "Intact," Arden said. "Every entry. I'm looking at it right now." She set her hand flat on the kitchen table. 41 entries, Arden continued. 19 officers, 4 years of documented stops organized by corridor, vehicle type, and, he paused, projected forfeiture yield. Another pause, slower this time. "Cora, your bike is in here, logged as a pre-identified target. Entry was made before the stop." She closed her eyes for exactly 3 seconds. Then she opened them. "Can you build a clean chain of custody?" she asked. "Already started," he said. She picked up her pen. "Send me everything," she said. Sunday night bled into Monday morning without either of them noticing. Arden had sent the files at 9:47 Sunday evening, a clean, organized package of recovered data with a preliminary forensic documentation report attached that was already building the evidentiary foundation they would need. Cora had called Julia within minutes. Julia had arrived at Cora's house by 10, with her legal pad, and a focused energy that didn't require coffee to sustain itself. They worked through the night at the kitchen table. The logbook was worse than Cora had imagined when Garver first described it. It wasn't the informal scribbling of one careless officer. It was a structured operational record. Column headers, date fields, location codes, vehicle classifications, estimated values, and a final column labeled simply yield that tracked actual forfeiture proceeds per stop. Someone had built this deliberately. Someone had maintained it carefully. This was not recklessness. This was a system. Meridian Boulevard appeared in 27 separate entries spanning 4 years. Julia read through each one without speaking. Her pen moved steadily, marking, noting, cross-referencing. Cora sat across from her and matched every logbook entry against the forfeiture filings she had pulled from public county records. The towing company's dispatch records that Julia had already subpoenaed through the civil lawsuit, and the dates of the community stops that Brandt had documented. They lined up. Every single one. By 2 in the morning, the shape of the arrangement was fully visible, and it was uglier than either of them had said out loud yet. The stops were not random. They were not even primarily driven by racial profiling in isolation, though that was the mechanism on the street. The stops were financially coordinated. Meridian Towing received advance notification of high-value targets in the corridor. Vehicles flagged by the participating officers before the stops were made. The towing company dispatched a truck to the general area ahead of time on flagged days, reducing response time and maximizing the number of vehicles that could be processed before anyone asked questions. Craig Rivers billed the county for towing and impoundment fees on every seized vehicle. The county paid from forfeiture proceeds. The seized vehicles themselves were auctioned through a sister company Craig Rivers had registered under his wife's name 18 months ago. Every dollar had a path. Every path led back to the same family. Cora found her entry just before 3 in the morning. It was logged the Friday before her arrest. Vehicle description: matte black sport bike, Italian, estimated value $28K plus. Location: Meridian Corridor, northbound. Source notation: a field she hadn't noticed in the earlier entries until she looked closely. Read: MDR tip, Meridian Dispatch and Recovery. Craig Rivers' company had flagged her bike before she ever turned onto that street. Larkin had been given a target. He had driven Meridian looking for it. She read the entry twice. Then she set the page down on the table and looked at the wall for a moment. They hadn't just profiled her. They had hunted her. "Julia," she said. Julia looked up from her notes. "My bike was flagged by the towing company the Friday before," Cora said. "Before any stop was made, before any alleged theft report. They identified the bike independently and passed it to Larkin as a target." Julia looked at the entry, read it, set it down. "That's not a civil rights violation inside a traffic stop," Julia said quietly. "That's a criminal conspiracy that used a traffic stop as its collection mechanism." "Yes," Cora said. Julia looked at her. "This changes the filing. This changes everything." Monday morning, Julia had the towing company's dispatch records delivered electronically to her office by 8 o'clock via the civil subpoena she had filed the previous week. The records arrived in 314 pages. She and Cora worked through them at the office, cross-referencing every dispatch date against the logbook entries. The correlation was near perfect. 41 logbook entries, 38 confirmed matching dispatch records from Meridian Towing. 3 entries had no dispatch match. Those were the ones where the stops had been made, and the vehicle had not been successfully seized. Drivers who had produced paperwork quickly enough or whose stops had been interrupted. Cora was one of those 3. They had tried to take her bike. They had simply not anticipated what she was. At 2 in the afternoon, Julia called the U.S. Attorney's Office in Atlanta directly. She identified herself, referenced Deputy Director Cole's earlier conversation with the office, and said 4 words that changed the temperature of the call immediately. "I have the logbook." A silence on the other end. Then, "We need to meet." Julia looked across the desk at Cora. "Tomorrow morning," Julia said into the phone. "Bring your criminal division chief." Tuesday morning, Julia left for the U.S. Attorney's office at 7:30 with a banker's box of organized evidence and the focused expression of a woman walking into a room she had been preparing for her entire career. Cora stayed home. It was Julia's meeting to run. The last thing the U.S. Attorney's Office needed was the plaintiff sitting across the table from their criminal division chief before charges were filed. Cora understood that. She didn't have to like it. She spent the morning on her map, adding, refining. The logbook had given her dates and details that filled gaps she hadn't known existed 2 days ago. She worked steadily and tried not to watch the clock. Julia called at 11:30. "It went well," she said, and the careful steadiness in her voice told Cora it had gone better than well. "They're moving. I can't say more than that right now. But they're moving." Cora exhaled slowly. "Okay. Go eat something," Julia said. "You sound like you haven't." She hadn't. She made a sandwich she ate standing at the kitchen counter and was back at her desk by noon. She worked through the afternoon, cross-referencing, organizing, building the kind of clean documented record that held up under the pressure of a courtroom. The kind of work that required total focus and gave her nothing to feel while she was doing it, which was exactly why she was doing it. Her phone rang at 4:15. She picked up. "Julia." "You need to hear this in person," Julia said. Her voice was measured, deliberate. The voice she used when something significant had shifted, and she wanted to control how it was delivered. "Come now. Don't rush. But come now." Cora was already standing. "Is it good or bad?" she asked. A pause. "Come see," Julia said. The drive to Delaney Street took 11 minutes. Cora parked on the street and sat in the car for a moment, with her hands still on the wheel, running through the possibilities. Good news from the U.S. Attorney's Office. A problem with the evidence chain. Something Arden had found. Something Dobbs had done. She got out and went inside. The building's elevator was slow, and the hallway on the 4th floor was dim in the late afternoon, one of the overhead lights doing something intermittent that nobody had fixed. Her footsteps were quiet on the old carpet. Through the frosted glass panel of Julia's office door she could see two shapes. Julia at her desk, and someone in the chair across from her, sitting forward, shoulders curved inward. The posture of someone carrying something they hadn't put down yet. She pushed the door open. The smell of the office was the same as always. Old paper, coffee. The particular dry warmth of a room where serious work had been done for a long time. The late afternoon sun came through the window behind Julia's desk in a long, flat band of light that caught the dust in the air and made the room feel very still. Julia looked up when Cora entered. Her expression was carefully neutral. She gave a small nod toward the chair beside the one already occupied. Mitch Garver turned his head. He looked like he hadn't slept since Saturday. His face was drawn and pale beneath the eyes in the particular way of someone who had been awake, not because they couldn't sleep, but because every time they got close, something pulled them back. He was in civilian clothes, jeans, a plain gray shirt. He had come here as himself, not as an officer. He looked at her for a moment. Then he looked away. She sat down. The room held its silence. Nobody rushed it. Garver sat with his elbows on his knees and his hands loosely clasped in front of him, staring at a point on the floor between his feet. His jaw was tight. She could see the muscle working at the hinge of it, the small, involuntary movement of a man grinding something down that kept trying to surface. She did not ask him why he had come. She did not say anything at all. She had spent 20 years learning that silence, applied correctly, was more useful than any question. A full minute passed. Then another. Julia sat motionless behind her desk, with her hands folded on top of her legal pad, waiting with the practiced patience of someone who had sat across from hard conversations for 30 years and understood that some of them needed time to begin. Garver exhaled through his nose, long and slow. "I couldn't look at him," he said finally. His voice was low and roughened around the edges. "My son. I'd pick him up and he doesn't know anything, obviously. He's 3 months old. He's just looking at me." He stopped, pressed his mouth together briefly. "But I couldn't look at him." Nobody spoke. "I keep telling myself I didn't do anything." He turned his hands over, looked at them for a moment, then clasped them together again. "But that's not the same as doing something right. I'm starting to understand the difference between those two things more than I'd like to." He still wasn't looking at either of them. The words were arriving in pieces, like a man dismantling something that had been built tightly. "I didn't come here with a plan," he said. A pause. "I drove past Meridian this morning, just driving, and I thought about you standing next to that bike." He glanced at Cora briefly, then back at the floor. "And then I drove here." Cora said nothing. Julia said nothing. Garver sat with the silence for a moment. Then he reached into his jacket pocket. He held his personal cell phone in both hands for a long moment, looking at it like a man deciding whether to open a door he couldn't unopen. He set it on the edge of Julia's desk. 3 days after I recanted, he said, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. I looked it up. He paused. It belongs to an attorney named Douglas Fenn. He's been handling department legal matters for Dobbs for 6 years. Julia put on her reading glasses and picked up the phone. Cora leaned slightly to read alongside her. There were 3 messages. They had been sent over the course of a single evening, each one spaced a few hours apart, like they were designed to land in sequence and build. The first said that Garver's cooperation with outside parties had been noted at the departmental level. That questions had recently been raised regarding a procedural filing irregularity in his personnel record from 18 months prior. An irregularity that had previously been overlooked as a matter of professional courtesy, but that could be revisited should circumstances require. The second message noted that officers under active internal review sometimes experienced processing delays in their departmental health coverage. Given that Garver's son had a scheduled cardiology follow-up next month, the message named the appointment specifically, which meant someone had accessed his family's medical records or his insurance filings. Delays in coverage resolution could create complications. It expressed hope that such delays would prove unnecessary. The third message said, "The smart play is the quiet play, Mitch." Julia set the phone down on the desk very carefully. The office was completely silent. Cora looked at the phone, then at Garver. His hands were clasped tight between his knees. He was staring at the middle distance with the flat, used-up expression of a man who had read those messages 50 times in 4 days, and felt the weight of them differently each time. "They named his appointment," Cora said quietly. "Yes," Garver said. "That's witness intimidation," she said. She said it plainly because it was a plain fact, and he deserved to hear it named correctly. "I know what it is." He looked at her then, directly, without looking away. "I know exactly what it is. And I know that coming here today means the irregularity in my file gets revisited, means my pension becomes a question instead of a certainty, means my family's insurance is going to be a fight for however long this takes." He paused. "I've been sitting with all of that for 4 days. I've thought it through completely. I'm not here because I stopped being scared." His jaw tightened. "I'm still scared." He reached out and picked the phone up from Julia's desk and held it for a moment before sliding it back into his jacket pocket. "But my son is going to be old enough to ask me questions someday," he said. "About who I was. About what I did when it mattered." He looked at Julia steadily. "I want to have the right answers." Julia held his gaze for a long moment. Then she stood and extended her hand across the desk. Garver stood. He shook it. He looked like a man who had just walked through something and wasn't entirely sure yet what was on the other side. But he was standing, both feet on the ground, eyes forward. That was enough. It was more than enough. The call came at 6:47 a.m. Cora was already awake. She had been awake since 5, sitting at her kitchen table in the gray pre-dawn quiet with a cup of coffee she had barely touched, doing nothing in particular. Just sitting, waiting for the day to arrive without knowing exactly what it was bringing, which was an unusual feeling for a woman who spent her professional life knowing exactly what was coming and exactly how to meet it. Her phone lit up. Deputy Director Cole. She answered immediately. "It's done," Cole said. "Indictments were unsealed 20 minutes ago. We move in the next hour." A brief pause. "I wanted you to hear it from me before the news." She set her hand flat on the table. "Thank you, Harlan," she said. "Get dressed," he said. "There's somewhere I need you to be by noon." She didn't watch the news coverage live. She got dressed instead. Dark suit, white shirt. The good shoes she kept for courtrooms and press conferences and moments that required her to be fully present and completely composed. She stood at the bathroom mirror and looked at herself for a moment. The woman looking back was 10 days older than the one who had ridden a Ducati down Meridian Boulevard on a Saturday afternoon thinking about pot roast and sweet tea. She looked like she had earned every one of those 10 days. At 7:04 a.m., 6 federal agents in plain vehicles arrived at the Macon County Sheriff's Department. They did not use sirens. They parked in the visitor lot in a line and got out with the unhurried efficiency of people who had done this before and had no reason to rush because everything was already decided. Two of them carried document cases. All of them wore jackets with 3 letters across the back. They came through the front entrance single file, badged through the security desk without stopping, and walked the length of the main corridor toward the sheriff's private office at the far end of the building. Sheriff Ray Dobbs was at his desk at 7:04 a.m. because Ray Dobbs was always at his desk by 7. It was the kind of discipline he mentioned often in interviews. He was reading through the week's scheduling summary with a cup of coffee at his elbow, and the comfortable certainty of a man who had just watched his internal investigation conclude exactly the way he needed it to. He heard the change in the building before anyone reached his door. It was a subtle thing, a shift in the ambient sound of the precinct, the particular quality of a busy office going quiet in sections, one room at a time, the way quiet travels when something is moving through a space, and everyone it passes stops what they are doing to watch it pass. He looked up from his desk. Through the interior window that faced the main corridor, he could see his assistant, Patricia, standing motionless at her station with her hands at her sides. She was staring at something outside his line of sight. Her expression was the expression of someone watching something they had no framework for. Dobbs set his coffee cup down slowly. He straightened his back. He looked at his hands on the desk for a moment. Steady, flat. The hands of a man who had managed difficult situations for 30 years. Then the knock came. 3 measured raps against his office door. Not loud, not aggressive. The knock of a person who was not asking for permission. The door opened before he responded. The agent who entered first was a woman in her 40s, dark jacket, warrant folder open in her left hand. She crossed the room to his desk with 4 even steps and stopped in front of it and looked at him directly. "Sheriff Dobbs," she said. "I'm Special Agent Diane Torres, FBI Atlanta Field Office. I have a federal arrest warrant issued by the United States District Court for the Northern District of Georgia." She placed the warrant folder on the desk in front of him and stepped back 1 pace. "Please stand and keep your hands visible." Dobbs looked at the warrant. He looked at it for a long time. His expression moved through several things in a short space. Calculation, assessment, the rapid running of options, and arrived somewhere that was not quite acceptance, but was adjacent to it. The look of a man who had understood several minutes ago that this was coming and had spent those minutes deciding how to be seen when it arrived. He stood, straightened his jacket, kept his hands in plain sight. He said nothing. Behind Torres, 2 more agents entered the room. One of them moved to his desk and began a methodical review of the files and materials on its surface, placing a hand on each item without disturbing anything yet, cataloging, not searching. Not yet. Outside in the corridor, through the interior window, Dobbs could see his staff watching. His deputy chief, his desk sergeant, the young officer from intake whose name he could never remember. All of them standing still. All of them watching him be walked out of the office he had occupied for 11 years, in the uniform he put on every morning like it meant something permanent. He let the agent take his arm. He walked. At 7:15 a.m., 4 federal agents arrived at Emil Larkin's house on a residential street in the eastern part of the county. It was a modest 2-story house with a basketball hoop in the driveway and an American flag mounted beside the front door. A truck was parked in the driveway. The lights were on inside. The agents parked at the curb. 2 went to the front door. 2 positioned at the sides of the property, visible, hands at their sides. The agent at the front door knocked. 30 seconds passed. The door opened. Larkin answered in uniform pants and an undershirt, coffee mug in hand, hair damp. He had clearly been getting ready for a shift. He looked at the agents on his doorstep, and the mug stopped halfway to his mouth. "Emil Larkin?" the agent said. "Yeah." His voice was careful, recognizing something without naming it yet. I'm Special Agent Kevin Marsh, FBI. I have a federal arrest warrant for your detention on charges, including conspiracy to violate civil rights under color of law, civil asset forfeiture fraud, and obstruction of justice. He held the warrant out. I need you to step outside and keep your hands where I can see them. Larkin stared at the warrant. He didn't take it. Something moved across his face. Disbelief first, then a fast, hot anger that rose up and didn't find anywhere useful to go. This is... He stopped. Started again. You've got to be kidding me. His voice climbed. I followed procedure. Every single step. I followed procedure, and I am being stood on my own doorstep. Mr. Larkin. Marsh's voice didn't change volume or temperature. Step outside, please. I want my attorney. He was louder now. I want my attorney right now. This is retaliation. This is a politically motivated. You tell whoever sent you that this is not going to... Your attorney will be notified, Marsh said, with the patient steadiness of a man who had heard variations of this before and had decided years ago not to engage with any of them. Step outside, please. A woman appeared in the hallway behind Larkin. His wife. She had a dish towel in her hands, and she looked at the agents on the doorstep, and her face changed completely. Larkin turned, looked at her, then turned back. His mouth was tight. His chest was rising and falling quickly. He was still angry. The anger was still right there, right at the surface. The same anger that had been on that street on Meridian Boulevard. The same anger that had pressed a pair of cuffs onto a woman who had done nothing wrong. But there was nothing for it to push against right now. Nothing to flex against. Just 4 federal agents standing in his driveway on a Wednesday morning with a warrant that had a judge's signature on it. He set the coffee mug down on the hallway table. He stepped outside. At 7:31 a.m., in the IT services office on the 3rd floor of the county administrative building, a sergeant named Brian Tolley was eating a breakfast sandwich at his desk when 2 agents walked through his door and presented a warrant charging him with obstruction of justice for ordering the destruction of evidence under federal investigation. Tolley didn't shout. He didn't argue. He put the sandwich down. He looked at the warrant. He looked at the agents. He looked back at the warrant. I was told to do it, he said quietly. You can say that to your attorney, the agent said. Tolley stood up slowly, like a man whose legs had aged 10 years in the previous 30 seconds, and put his hands out in front of him. Julia called from her car at 9:15 as Cora was driving to the courthouse, and Cora could hear the controlled electricity in her voice. The sound of a woman watching something she had helped build finally arrive at its full size. Craig Rivers was arrested at the tow yard 40 minutes ago, Julia said. 3 additional officers from the logbook were in custody by 8. 19 federal counts across all defendants. A pause. And Garver has a negotiated agreement. His attorney worked through the night. He kept his word. Yes, Cora said. He did. The federal courthouse on Forsyth Street was surrounded by news cameras by the time Cora arrived. She came in through a side entrance where Cole met her in the parking structure with the quiet, steady presence of a man who understood that some days were more important than others, and that this was one of them. He looked at her for a moment when she walked up. You look like yourself, he said. I am myself, she said. He almost smiled. Come on. The U.S. attorney, a sharp, precise woman named Helen Voss, held her press conference in the courthouse's main briefing room at noon. The room was full. Cameras, reporters, attorneys, community members who had lined the walls 3 deep. Cora stood in the second row behind the podium with Cole on one side and Julia on the other. Councilwoman Brandt was in the front row. She was holding a folded piece of paper against her chest with both hands, a handwritten list of 23 names. The families. The people this had actually been about from the beginning. Voss spoke clearly and without performance. She described the enterprise as it actually was, a 4-year criminal conspiracy that had used the authority of law enforcement as a mechanism for financial predation against a specific community corridor. She named the defendants. She named the charges. She described the evidence, the logbook, the towing records, the coordination, the money. She said the words organized crime without hesitation. Then she said, "This investigation began because one woman refused to be erased." She stepped back from the podium and nodded once toward Cole. Cole leaned toward Cora. "That's you," he said quietly. She stepped forward. The room shifted. Cameras adjusted. The low murmur beneath Voss's remarks went completely silent. Cora stood at the podium and looked out at the room. At Brandt in the front row with her list pressed against her chest and her eyes full and her chin held high. She thought about Meridian Boulevard, about blue lights in her mirror on a Saturday afternoon, about the sound the cuffs made, about the red line across her wrist bone that had bruised by morning and faded by the following week, about the things that don't fade. She pulled the microphone toward her, set both hands on the edges of the podium, and began. Cora spoke for 4 minutes. She did not speak about herself. She stood at the podium in the full briefing room with the cameras pointed at her, and the silence of 200 people pressing in from all sides, and she spoke about the 23 families. She said their names. All of them. Bernie Merrick, Sylvia Crane, Deshaun Mobley. 20 more after that, each name read from the list Councilwoman Brandt had pressed against her chest in the front row, and passed forward without being asked. The moment Cora stepped up to the microphone, she read every name slowly and clearly, the way names deserve to be read when they have been ignored for too long. Then she set the list down on the podium and looked up. "What happened to me on Meridian Boulevard 10 days ago was wrong," she said. "But I want to be clear about something. What happened to me had a witness with a phone and a title and 20 years of federal credentials in a storage compartment. What happened to these 23 people?" She touched the list. "Happened in the dark. Happened to people who were told their word wasn't enough. Who were processed through a system designed to take from them and move on before anyone looked too closely." She paused. "We looked closely. And we are not looking away." She stepped back from the podium. The room held its silence for a full 2 seconds before it broke open. Afterward, in the corridor outside the briefing room, Brandt found her. She didn't say anything for a moment. She just put both arms around Cora and held on the way older women hold on when they have been fighting something for a very long time and have just watched it begin to fall. Cora held on back. "Your father would have loved today," Brandt said quietly, close to her ear. Cora closed her eyes briefly. "Yes," she said, "he would have." The restitution details were announced by Voss in a follow-up briefing that afternoon. A community fund had been established, seeded by federal civil asset recovery from Meridian Towing and Recovery and its associated shell companies. Every documented forfeiture from the 4-year operation would be contested. Vehicles that could be returned would be returned. Those that could not would be compensated from the fund at fair market value. Every pretextual arrest made on Meridian Boulevard during the operation's active period would be reviewed for expungement. The county's exclusive towing contract with Meridian Towing and Recovery was terminated effective immediately. Deshaun Mobley's Kawasaki was already in the process of being located and returned. Julia found Cora in the courthouse parking structure at 4:30, still in her suit jacket, sitting on the hood of her car with her feet on the bumper and her face tilted up toward the narrow strip of sky visible between the levels above. Julia leaned against the car beside her and said nothing for a moment. "How do you feel?" she asked finally. Cora considered the question genuinely, the way it deserved. "Tired," she said. "Grateful." A pause. Ready to go home. Julia nodded. Your mother called me twice today, she said. She wanted me to make sure you ate something. Cora smiled. It was a real smile. It reached her eyes and stayed there. I'm heading over there now, she said. She pushed off the hood and stood up straight. She looked at Julia. This woman who had picked up a phone at 7 in the morning 10 days ago and said, I'm already working before Cora had even asked. This woman who had stood beside her father in a photograph on an office wall for 30 years and had never once stopped doing the work that photograph represented. Thank you, Cora said, for all of it. Julia waved a hand like the words were unnecessary, but her eyes said she heard them. Go ride your bike, Julia said. She changed in the federal building's ground floor restroom. Suit exchanged for riding leathers. Good shoes exchanged for boots. She folded the jacket carefully over her arm and walked it to her car, hung it on the hook behind the driver's seat, and went to where the Ducati waited on the parking level above. She stood beside it for a moment. She ran her hand along the fuel tank the way she always did. The metal was warm from the afternoon. She checked the mirrors, checked the tire pressure out of habit, pulled on her gloves, finger by finger. Then she put her helmet on, swung her leg over the seat, and started the engine. The sound filled the parking structure and bounced off the concrete walls and came back to her from every direction at once, full and deep and completely alive. The sound Wade had loved. The sound she had spent 8 months rebuilding from nothing because some things were worth the work of bringing back. She rolled out of the parking structure into the late afternoon sun and turned south. Meridian Boulevard was exactly as it always was. Shop windows, oak trees, families moving along the sidewalk without a care in the world. The ordinary, unhurried rhythm of a city going about its Saturday afternoon. The wide, flat road running south in the warm October light, exactly as it had run on the afternoon 10 days ago when she had ridden down it thinking about pot roast and sweet tea and the particular piece of a rare day off. She rode past the spot. She knew exactly where it was. She would always know exactly where it was. The precise point on the curb where the Ducati had sat, with its engine cooling, while she sat cuffed in the back of a patrol car. The exact stretch of sidewalk where Lucy Brandt had raised her phone and refused to look away. She did not slow down. She rode through it the same way she had ridden into all of it. Eyes forward, spine straight, both hands steady on the bars. Not performing strength, simply having it. The way she had always had it, on every street, in every room, through every year of a life built on the refusal to be made small. The Ducati's engine opened up as she cleared the corridor and the road widened ahead of her. She was not riding away from something. She was riding toward everything she had fought for, toward her mother's kitchen and the smell of pot roast and the sound of a woman who had been watching the clock and putting a plate in the refrigerator for 10 days, waiting for her daughter to finally come home. She rode. 3 months later, the federal cases moved through the Northern District of Georgia with the quiet, grinding efficiency of a system that, when properly directed, was capable of extraordinary thoroughness. Julia kept Cora informed. Not because Cora needed the updates to move forward with her life. She had already done that. But because Julia believed that the people who had fought hardest for a verdict deserved to hear it spoken clearly when it arrived. She called on a Tuesday morning in January. Cora was back at the Atlanta field office, 3 weeks returned from administrative leave, sitting at a desk that felt familiar and right and entirely hers again. Dobbs took a plea, Julia said. Cora leaned back in her chair. Ray Dobbs, former sheriff of Macon County, had entered a guilty plea on 7 federal counts: conspiracy to deprive civil rights under color of law, civil asset forfeiture fraud, wire fraud, and 2 counts of using a public office for private financial gain. His attorneys had negotiated aggressively for 18 weeks, and had arrived at a number they apparently considered acceptable. 14 years in federal prison, no possibility of early release for the first 10. He would serve his sentence at a federal correctional facility in Alabama, approximately 90 miles from the office he had occupied for 11 years. His pension was forfeited in full. His brother-in-law, Craig Rivers, whose towing company had been the financial engine of the entire operation, had not been offered the same plea consideration. He had gone to trial and lost badly. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. He received 18 years on 9 counts of fraud, conspiracy, and criminal profiteering. Meridian Towing and Recovery was permanently dissolved by court order. The property and equipment were liquidated to fund the community restitution account. "And Larkin," Cora said. Julia paused in the particular way she paused when a piece of information carried more weight than the words around it. Emil Larkin had refused a plea for 11 weeks. His attorney had argued publicly and loudly that his client had done nothing beyond the limits of standard law enforcement procedure, that the stop on Meridian Boulevard was lawful, and that the federal charges amounted to political persecution of a working officer. He had given 2 more television interviews from his living room. He had started a fundraising page that raised a modest amount from people who had never been on the wrong side of a pretextual stop and never expected to be. Then the logbook was admitted into evidence. His attorney stopped giving interviews. Larkin accepted a plea on 5 counts: conspiracy to violate civil rights under color of law, fabrication of a law enforcement pretext, obstruction of justice, participation in a criminal forfeiture enterprise, and witness intimidation relating to the pressure campaign against Garver. The sentence was 11 years. He would be required to complete a full civil rights accountability program as a condition of any eventual parole consideration. His law enforcement certification was permanently revoked in the state of Georgia, effective immediately. He would never wear a badge again. He was 44 years old. Brian Tolley, the IT sergeant who had ordered the drive wipe, had cooperated fully from the moment of his arrest and had provided detailed testimony about the chain of command behind the sanitization order. Who gave it, when, and in what precise words? His cooperation had been extensive enough that the federal prosecutor had recommended leniency. He received 3 years of supervised probation, a permanent bar from public sector employment, and 200 hours of community service. Of the 19 officers named in the logbook, 14 had entered plea agreements. 3 had gone to trial and lost. 2 were still pending as of January, their cases delayed by procedural filings their attorneys were using to run out the clock. They would not run it out far enough. Julia was certain of that, and Julia was not in the habit of being wrong. "What about the expungements?" Cora asked. 21 of the 23 cases have been formally expunged as of last week, Julia said. The remaining 2 are pending final court signatures. Should be done by the end of the month. A pause. Deshaun Mobley got his bike back in November. His mother called me to say thank you. She cried for about 5 minutes and then told me she had been praying for this since the day it was taken. Cora looked out the window of her office at the Atlanta skyline in the gray January morning. "Good," she said quietly. She meant it completely. "One more thing," Julia said. "The county commissioners voted last week to rename the stretch of Meridian Boulevard between 4th and 18th Street. A brief pause, the pause of someone saving the best detail for last. They're calling it the Beaumont Corridor." Cora was quiet for a long moment. "Tell them to call it something else," she said finally. "I already did," Julia said. "They declined." She asked about Garver last. She always saved him for last, the way you save the most complicated part of a thing for when you have enough quiet around you to think about it properly. "He resigned from the department in October," Julia said, 2 weeks after the indictments, before anyone could push him out. Cora had known that part. What she didn't know was what came after it. His negotiated agreement kept him out of prison, Julia continued, which was the right outcome, given the totality of what he provided. His testimony was the spine of the conspiracy case against Dobbs. Without it, we had the logbook and the towing records, but we didn't have the human architecture. Who gave orders, who received them, who knew what and when. Garver filled every one of those gaps. His pension, Cora said. Partially preserved, Julia said. The department fought it, as expected. His attorney fought back harder. The final arrangement was a reduced pension, 60% of his earned benefit, beginning at 62. Not what he would have received had he completed his service cleanly, but enough. Enough to matter. The health insurance, the thing Fenn's threatening text had dangled over his newborn son like something casual and monstrous, had been secured through a separate provision in the negotiated agreement, guaranteed through a federal program for cooperating witnesses for a period of 3 years while Garver established new employment. He had found employment faster than anyone expected. A nonprofit legal aid organization in Atlanta that specialized in civil rights documentation and community advocacy had hired him in November as a field investigator. His job, specifically, was to document and report patterns of pretextual stops and unlawful civil forfeiture in Georgia counties. He had taken a significant pay cut. He had accepted it without negotiation. Julia had heard this from his attorney and had called Cora the same afternoon to tell her, because she understood without needing to discuss it, that Cora would want to know. Does he know he's essentially doing what we were doing? Cora had said that day in November. I think that's rather the point, Julia had replied. In January, a letter arrived at Cora's office at the Atlanta field office, hand-addressed. No return address on the envelope, but she recognized the handwriting from his signature on the statement he had given federal prosecutors in October. Careful, slightly cramped, the writing of a man who thought about what he put on paper. She opened it at her desk. It was 2 paragraphs. Short. The kind of letter written by someone who had spent a long time deciding whether to send it, and had finally decided that not sending it was the worst choice. The first paragraph said that he understood if she never thought of him as anything other than the man who cuffed her and stayed quiet, and then recanted under pressure, and that he wouldn't argue with that characterization because it was accurate. He did not ask for forgiveness. He was careful and specific about that. He wrote the words, "I am not asking you to forgive this," in a complete sentence, and moved on, which told her more about his character than any apology could have. The second paragraph said that his son's name was Wade, that they had named him before any of this happened, named him after his wife's grandfather, a man who had spent 40 years as a school principal in rural Georgia, and who his wife had described as the most quietly decent person she had ever known. He said he thought about that name a lot lately, about what it meant to try to grow into it, about the distance between the man he had been on that street in September and the man he was trying to become. He signed it with his first name only, Mitch. Cora read it twice. Then she folded it carefully along its original creases and put it in the inside pocket of her jacket, close. She sat at her desk for a moment in the January quiet of her office and thought about Wade Arden, who had found the logbook in a backup server nobody knew existed. About Wade Garver, 3 months old, looking up at his father with no knowledge of what his father had done or undone. About Wade Beaumont, her husband, whose bike she had rebuilt from nothing because some things are worth the work of bringing back. 3 men named Wade. All of them matter, in different ways, to the same story. She pulled the letter from her pocket, looked at it once more, and placed it carefully in her desk drawer. Then she looked out the window at the Atlanta skyline, at the city running its ordinary January morning in every direction as far as she could see, at the roads cutting through it, wide and long and open, running south toward Macon County, toward Meridian Boulevard, toward the stretch of road that would carry a new name on its signs by the end of the month, whether she liked it or not. She thought about riding down it. She probably would. On a Saturday afternoon, maybe. When the sun was warm and the road was clear, and she had somewhere good to be on the other side of it, she pulled the next file toward her, opened it, and got back to work. The work was always waiting. That was exactly how she preferred it. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like to support my channel, and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. On the screen, I have picked 2 special stories just for you. Have a wonderful day.